such a beautiful group of people. It's such a treat to be here with you. We have this thing, and it didn't go on. We have this thing in the Unitarian Universalist that we call the 7 principles, and most of us are familiar with them. But we also have a thing called the 6 sources. So the 6 sources are several things I'm not going to spend a lot of time with, but they have to do with drawing on traditions and other people's thought, the ancient words of the prophets, shamanic traditions, etc. And I want to focus this time on the one that's highlighted, the humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason. And I'm going to explore something around that word reason because, well, it turns out, like so many other words in the English language, it has evolved. And what we think we mean when we say reason and what some of the early American thinkers thought are different. Ralph Waldo Emerson is often considered the American delineation of Unitarian philosophy. He's the transcendentalist writer. And he says reason is the highest faculty of the soul. Now, in the 19th century, soul was an integration of heart and mind. It was that which was richer and more full than the intellect, and it was our sense of who we are in the most wonderful, deep sense of the term. He got the idea of reason as a concept when he was visiting in Europe during the year following his expulsion from the Unitarian Church. He had been the associate pastor at the Second Church in Boston, and the senior pastor went on leave, and it happened to be springtime, and Easter came along, and Emerson's going, I don't think we should be treating Jesus like a god and doing this communion thing. And the board of elders said, you better go home, son, and think about whether you want to do this job. So things have changed since then, obviously. But he did take a year. He had a little bit of savings. His wife had passed on, so there was a lot of tumult in his emotional life. And he took a year and went to Europe and visited with this transcendentalist community there. And Samuel Coleridge was one of them. And Coleridge was not just a poet, he was also a critic. He was one of those people who wrote essays and about poetry and literature. And one of the things that he said was that reason consists of perception, insight, recognition, right? And cognition. It's not just cognition, all right? He also distinguished between reason and understanding, telling us that understanding is working all the time. He says it toils all the time, right? So as we move forward in history, we start seeing some interesting things evolve. But where Coleridge got this idea was from John Milton, who wrote it into Paradise Lost. Okay, so it had been around for a couple hundred years by the time Coleridge was playing with it in the 1830s. But one of the things that we're not accustomed to remembering is that most of the folks in that period had access to maybe 4 books in a lifetime, maybe 5. The Bible is usually one of them. Some of Shakespeare was usually one of them, and then perhaps a copy of Paradise Lost. All the way through the 1700s into the 1800s. So this is part of why the ideas of one person might have such a profound influence. So he says, to the intellect, give both life and sense, fancy and understanding. All of that goes to the intellect. Then the soul, reason receives, and reason is her being. The reason that he's talking about is a soul-level experience. It is not purely the intellect. So understanding involves the intellect. Reason is something richer. Now, Emerson went on with this to help us understand this even more fully. He was trying to help us get that there is this universal soul of which we are a part. Okay? And from that emerges all these wonderful qualities. Everything the seven principles of the UUs talks about, almost everything that in New Thought traditions, unity, religious science, divine science, we call the qualities of the divine. These emerge out of that understanding, or that soul, that infinite soul, that universal soul that we all have. And so as we look in that direction that we all have access to, we look in that direction, then we go, oh yes, that shines, that's shining, that's beautiful. And that realization is what he was calling reason. The universal soul, capital R, reason. This is not what we're used to thinking. He talks about applying that same universal soul and all its qualities to the world around us, and he says we call that spirit. That is the creative force, the creator, right? And he says in all languages, people call that that from which all the world around us emerges, the Father. And he can find, in Sanskrit and Hebrew and Greek, Father Zeus, Father Kronos, Father Time, all of these qualities, all of these characters of historical cultures have been the descriptors of that creative source, that spiritual being. So for Emerson, spirit is the means by which the world is created around us, the natural processes, the consistency of unfolding that we see in the natural world. And reason is how that becomes present in us. The guidance of reason. So to help us understand understanding, again, he makes that distinction. There is a distinction between reason, which comes from and through that deeper part of ourselves, that soul that is everywhere at the same time. Whereas understanding likes to look at matter particularly and play with it, right? The understanding adds, divides, combines, and measures. In the work in the Course in Miracles, this is the difference between the ego self and what the ego intellect mind does, as opposed to what the spirit soul mind does, right? So he's trying to help us see that we have both of these processes, and it's a choice. We're not stuck in one or the other. Well, by 2005, the word reason had changed, and you all know it has, because the way I'm describing reason does not fit the way we grew up with it and the way we've used it. And in 2005, the UUA was looking at this source, this guidance of reason. And what they found was that virtually everyone said, yes, we need reason, but we don't know how much. Right? The disagreement, we reason as to whether reason is enough. We disagree as to whether reason is enough, or whether we need to use other capacities beyond reason. So literally we flipped it. What's happened is, as we go forward, reason in 2005 is what Emerson meant by understanding. Right? We can see that in we apply. This is the traditional structure in the UU training. We apply reason to our experience. We apply reason to the traditions. We apply reason to the scriptures. Now I'm going to back up one. Two. There we go. Where did it go, dude? There we go. The way the UUA talks about reason now is that it is the application of our intellect to all the things that we otherwise, as it pointed out in the top bullet, were considered religious superstitions. So as part of how Unitarianism distinguished itself from traditional religions, we bring reason to the table. We bring our understanding. We bring our intellect to the table. We just don't wholesale absorb what we were told as we were growing up. So that's kind of the distinction that was being made. And a lot of people misread Emerson's use of the word reason. Reason is the highest faculty, but it's not understanding. Understanding is not the highest faculty. Understanding is something that we use to keep our mind occupied. Reason is how we are
part of experiencing ourselves as part of a larger whole, where our soul, our heart, our mind, all of us, our whole self is engaged, is what Emerson intended, and the Unitarians are now saying, oops, it's just the understanding, which leads to an issue, which is brought forth in, where did it go? I'm sorry, I don't mean to do that to you. There we go. The tension. This is one of the Unitarian ministers that's quoted on the UUA website around this particular source, the guidance of reason. And she says this tension between reason and intuitive or spiritual expression, Emerson couldn't see a tension there. For him, it was all the same. Intuitive and spiritual expression were the experience of reason. What's happened is we've got a tension between the intellect and the reason, between understanding, as he would have said it, and the reason. And so this tension, she says, will forever play, will forever play its way through the dance of Unitarian Universalism. This tension between the use of the intellect and the use of this soul self understanding. Is it just going to be the intellect, or is it going to be the whole being? Is it just going to be reason with a small r, or is it going to be what Emerson was talking about? One of the things that has happened in the world that I've been fortunate to go through is that we were trained as baby boomers to think that the intellect was the only thing that we should ever learn to rely on. We couldn't trust our hearts. We couldn't trust our intuition because we had no idea how to use it. We couldn't trust authority, question authority, right? And so we trusted our intellects until, for most of us, it began to not be sufficient. And we began to realize, and in my case, my whole mind-body system wore out because I had been relying on the intellect instead of allowing the whole self to function. So one of the things we get to look at here is, how do we continue to work with that? She says, how do we use the power of reason? How do we bring our intellect, right, including all the sciences that have emerged, all the wonderful things that are happening in the sciences, and those of you who know me know that that's been my world for a long time, okay? And philosophy have to offer, along with that internal thing. How do we do both? How do we do both, right? What does the dance between what we've been calling reason and what we've been calling spirit look like? What is the dance between the intellect and the whole being? And where each of us is going to find our own version of that. Is it going to look like this calm, almost perfect reflection that my intellect and my deeper understanding, my intellect and my heart self are reflecting each other, and it's calm and it's beautiful? Jennifer and Sally shared a video with me last night of a Korean Buddhist nun who's considered one of the top chefs in the world, and she only cooks for her monastery. And she says, in the cooking, I am following Buddha's way. In the cooking, I am free. For her, intellect, heart, soul are perfectly, calmly reflected. Yes, all of it integrated in that calm reflection. But it might be a little more turbulent. It might be a little rocky on that path of integrating the thoughts and the wonders and the questions. And one of the things that one of the teachers I work with likes to say is that if you're asking, if you're seeking truth in the realm of matter, you'll just get more questions. Right? So each of these rocks
becomes the next question, right? Oh, I gotta solve this one before I can flow with the flow, right? And then there's that set of mountains up there that maybe I might have to find my way through. All right? This way of integrating or dancing between that use of the intellect and the integration of our heart and soul can be uncomfortable at best. And in our culture, one of the things I've been playing with, a couple of you have already heard this, I've been playing with the last couple of weeks that we are evolving as humanity. And as a culture, we are evolving. Believe it or not, it is happening. It isn't pretty right now because a lot of things are falling apart, and they have to fall apart if we're going to have something new in their place. And it really looks yucky, and it's okay. It really is okay. When we follow only the intellect, when we follow the numbers, when we make profits happen, when we say that, the polls say I have to do this, things get out of hand. And that was one of the things that Emerson was concerned about. He says if you just follow the understanding, you lose touch with who you really are. And he says, and sometimes that leads to violence. Isn't that interesting? So we're in that time. We've had, all us baby boomers grew up, the intellect was all there is, and that's what the culture's been working from. I remember at a time when I was studying CEOs of companies and how they made decisions, one of the most powerful CEOs in the country said, all I need are 7 numbers every day. Just give me those 7 numbers and I know exactly what to do for the whole company. And it was one of these mega corporations with lots and lots of different activities. And I'm going, now that's a very intellectual approach. He had, in his mind, he knew if that number meant that these things were happening in this way, and this way, and this way, and these were the consequences, and that was okay, or not okay. All in the intellect. And then there was the guy who pulled GE together, as it had been in the early part of 2006, although I just saw a chart, and it's a totally different company today, so, this is not about current GE. This is when GE bought NBC. Remember that? The CEO then was a guy named Jack Welch. And he wrote a book, From the Gut. Jack Welch, From the Gut. And one of the things that he was saying was, the analysis can only carry me so far, but then I have to trust the gut. I have to feel the instinctive sense of what it is that needs to happen here. He found his own dance between the intellect and the rest of his being. And he built what was a manufacturing company into one of the world's biggest conglomerates. I don't know that that's a good thing, but it was a process that he was hired to do, and that's how he did it. And he made it happen by doing this dance. And for him, it looked like this. And he kind of enjoyed that. Most of America is dealing with this right now. Some of it is dealing with this. Is this dance between what's going on in our intellect, this gorgeous and fascinating and interesting tangle that looks almost impenetrable of possibilities and directions and outcomes and no idea of where and how and when. And that's when we go back to what I call the principles. Whether they're the Yu principles or New Thought principles or Buddhist principles or in a set of principles that say, okay, this much I can trust. This much I can go with. And they have to be ones that resonate with our heart selves. They are part of our soul selves. They are principles that are grounded in what Emerson called the universal soul. And they have to feel right. There's a channeled book that came out in the late 70s, early 80s called Emmanuel's Book. Some of you have had a chance to look at it. I highly recommend it. It's the most loving book I've ever read. And in it, a woman named Pat Radagast, who's working with Ram Dass, has discovered that she goes into a light trance and people ask her questions and this information comes through and it's just there. But there's a point in there where someone says, should I just follow everything you say?
And the information that came through was, you must test everything in your heart. Whatever anyone tells you, test it in your heart. And I took that to mean, does it fit? Does it feel in alignment with who I see myself becoming? Not who I see myself as, but who am I becoming? Who am I, longing to be in the world, in my life, in the universe? Does what I just heard fit with that? Right? And then the tango begins to open up into a path. And I can see where my next step is. I may not see beyond the next step, but I don't need to. And that's where the intellect can get us into trouble. I have a 20-year career as a futurist in my history, and I've been bringing that forward, analyzing trends, analyzing institutions. Where are we now? What's happening? What's been happening for the last 5, 10, 15, 150, 2,000, 6,000 years? And where is it going? That was what I did. And that was fun. I have to tell you, it's a great playground. And when you start making it be what your life is, when you start having, well, what's the trend in my life, and how am I going to make this, and how am I going to do that, and you start focusing on the hows, that's when the intellect is messed up. There needs to be that testing it so that it feels like that. That's where we're aiming for. When all the thoughts and all the feelings and all the experiences are this glorious unfolding of peace and beauty and harmony. Yes? So then we have another option. We can just realize it's all a big joke and start laughing. I just love this picture. It's one of my favorites. Little Tibetan kids having a good time. And there gets to be a place where people do this. They just simply start laughing. They just simply start experiencing the whole thing as a cosmic joke. The whole thing as a comedic play. And this is a romantic comedy, and it's called a romantic comedy because nobody dies. Not because there's a romance. Right? It's just the unfolding of infinite possibilities in intriguingly humorous ways. That is another way to be in the world. And it works. And it's part of what one of our sources talks about. We call him Jesus in the New Testament. He says, unless you become as little children, this is what he's talking about. Unless you just get to the place where it is, wow, just a delightful experience. You don't get to that calm, beautiful state. Or maybe you can have both. The path of the intellect is something else. Werner Heisenberg, you may have heard of the Heisenberg principle, and Werner is one of the fathers of the sciences that define our current age and will continue to define it for the next 50 years or so. And he's voicing something that a man 100 years before him wrote in a book. And the book was called Natural Law in the Spiritual World. Okay? When we first start to discover the joy and the delight of that intellectual reasoning process, as Stephen Hawking said, there was no need for God in that hypothesis. He's changing his tune as he comes into his later years. Because when you get to the bottom of the cup, you find some universal, intelligent, loving, compassionate process unfolding that seems to be guided by a will. And that will seems to be intent on our well-being. And that is the reason that Emerson would love to have us be guided.